one of the things I appreciate about the way that Trump looks at foreign negotiation is that he recognizes that the U.S. is by far the economic world superpower. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? That isn't going to change anytime soon. In fact, I think based off of things like the dollar milkshake theory, as well as I think what is impending economic collapse in China within the next 20 to 30 years, the United States is not only going to remain in the preeminent, dominant economic position in the world, but our position is only going to get better. Now, that doesn't mean that the overall global economy is going to get better. We might have a better position in a diminished overall economy. Although I'm much more hopeful with Trump at the helm than I've been in a long time. But U.S. stays number one at the top. It's almost like most U.S. presidents in my lifetime, it's almost like they've been ashamed of that fact when it came to negotiating trade deals, or when it came to basically using our clout in order to get what we wanted out of foreign countries. It was almost. It was almost like, well, that's not, we're the big guy. We should be nice. They're the little guy. And Trump's like, no, screw that. We're not friends. Nations don't have friends. They have interests. And we've got some interests, and our interests have been taking a backseat to everybody else's interests for decades now, and that's over. We're the global economic superpower. We're also the global military power. Now, I think Trump goes into negotiations and he looks at that tariff as a weapon. So he looks at a 25% tariff against Colombia and he says, look, it's real simple. Will the American people get hurt by a 25% tariff on Colombian goods? Yes. Will we be hurt by a retaliatory tariff that Colombia could launch against American goods coming into Colombia? Yes. But you'll be hurt more. So what do you want to do? And what Colombia and Mexico and Canada have concluded is, okay, what do you want?
We'll send our planes to pick up our illegal immigrants.
It is, look, say what you want. Say what you want about Trump's threatening of tariffs in order to get countries to do things. In many cases, things that have nothing to do, or I shouldn't say nothing to do, things that are not as directly related to economic policy. Secure the border, Mexico. Does that impact our economy? Of course it does, but it's not what we would first associate it with immigration or border security, not economic policy. And so the leveraging of a tariff, unless Mexico secures its border, is a way to use economic power to achieve immigration policy. You see similar things with Canada, although there I think it was a little bit more focused on overall economic policy, but there was also the border security issue up there as well. So I do think part of Trump's strategy is actually recognizing we're the economic superpower. You need us more than we need you. That's a result both of what we're able to produce. It's a result of what we're able to consume. But it's also a result of us being the world's reserve currency.
I think that is the biggest thing that's at play here. When I look at the debate over tariffs, the libertarian argument is one that I've espoused for a long time on tariffs, which is, well, no, I support free trade. I don't want to, have government taxes on goods. I want to be able to buy things from anywhere in the world at the cheapest price, me as an individual. But we have to consider that the government has already rigged the market on first principles because of monetary policy. Like, part of the reason that the United States has deindustrialized is because politicians meddled with the money supply in a way that forced deindustrialization. The reason that we have a huge swath of land in the United States called the Rust Belt is because we're the global reserve currency and we're pumping dollars to the rest of the world instead of pumping goods out to the rest of the world. And so what that did is that we already messed with the marketplace from the start, 80 years ago during Bretton Woods.
And let's not pretend that other countries in the world didn't want us to do it, right? Like
sure.
Yeah.
But
France maybe.
The point is that having the reserve currency is incredibly powerful and beneficial for politicians in the federal government.
Yes.
It is not beneficial for the average American. The average American has arguably actually been hurt by the fact that we possess the reserve currency. I need people to understand this. It is a double-edged sword. Thomas Sowell was absolutely right when he said there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And monetary policy, tariffs, all of these things, there is no solution to something. There is a cost benefit analysis at play here. So if you adopt a purely free trade, for example, if you adopt a purely free trade approach, no matter what, we won't impose any tariffs. There is a cost that is paid there in the form of potentially, if you have the reserve currency, certainly, a deindustrialization of your country and a potential over-reliance on actors around the world that might not have your best interests at heart.
Sure, but again, the thing that we need to take into, two things that we need to take into consideration. One is a big part of the reason why the U.S. dollar being the world's reserve currency has been problematic for us on one footing, while it could be arguably beneficial on others, is because it's a fiat currency. It would be a very, very different world if it was a commodity-backed currency and the world's reserve currency. Now, there would still be trade-offs involved, but it would nowhere near be as stark as what happens when it's a fiat currency.
But a commodity-backed global reserve currency ultimately doesn't give politicians the type of power that they want with a
but
fiat.
Christian, that's not the point, right? Like I
know that you understand
why we have fiat versus commodity-backed and why politicians like the fiat. I'm just saying that the concerns that you bring up with being the world's reserve currency is because the world's reserve currency is a fiat currency.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So to that point, Donald Trump is now leveraging American power, which exists on the economic stage because both of our consumer base, our productive capacity, and the fact that world's reserve currency. He is leveraging all of that to get countries to do what we want. I think the pro of that is that in many respects, it can actually be a highly efficient way to get better trade deals, which are actually freer trade deals. The other thing that it can actually do is that it can actually get people to live up to fulfilling their own responsibilities, either based off of treaties or other practical considerations, without having to deploy a single troop. Right?
You're talking like NATO, funding or something like that potentially.
NATO funding, Mexico securing the border, Colombia, taking its citizens back. Like all of these are ways that Trump has been able to utilize or leverage the threat of a tariff in order to achieve a desired outcome. And I think it's difficult to argue with the results thus far in that respect. The trade-off is that by doing so, you do encourage other countries to eventually come to the conclusion that being completely dependent on the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency might not be in their best long-term economic interest. That's where you get things like BRICS. Right now, again, I don't think there's any viable alternative right now to the U.S. dollar as I look around the global economy. And so even if they come to that conclusion, it would A, be a long time coming, and B, might not be a bad thing for the United States long term, especially if we actually ended up with some sort of currency that was commodity based, or because again, fiat currencies are not good for anybody, except for politicians that want to spend money without immediate short term consequences that can be tied back to them. So that's one way that Trump is using tariffs in a way that I think has been very effective so far. We just need to understand that there's also potential trade offs to that as well. The next one would be improving U.S. trade deals. This is one that I think is going to be interesting to watch. I don't think Trump is as free market as I am. I don't think he's as free trade as I am. But I do think he recognizes the value of international trade. And it was funny. I've described it this way before, but there was a page that said, Are tariffs good economic policy, or are they just good as a negotiating tool? And the way I described it, and somebody got furious with me in the comments, right? Like, I'm a traitor to my country. Like, shut up. Right? I love it when somebody in their basement is telling me I'm a traitor to my country. It's like, you want to compare resumes? I said, look, tariffs are a little bit like chemotherapy. You don't take chemotherapy. If you have cancer, you don't take chemotherapy because chemotherapy is good for you. You take it because it's bad for the cancer. Once the cancer is gone, you know what you stop doing? Taking chemotherapy. Why? Because it's bad for you. It was just worse for the cancer than it was for you. When the cancer's gone, you stop the chemotherapy. And I said, that's why it's useful as a negotiation tool. And again, this guy comes in like, you're an idiot. You don't understand anything. All nations have tariffs. I'm like, okay. And is that working out for all nations? Like, what What argument are you making? I said, okay, let me put it this way. You want to know how I know that Donald Trump doesn't honestly believe that tariffs are the key to prosperity? You want to know how I know? Every time Donald Trump threatens a tariff and a country relents and does what he wants, what's the first thing he does? He removes the tariff. Why? If the tariff is what's key to American prosperity, why would you remove the tariff? Why would you remove the tariff once you got what you want in the negotiation deal? Maybe it's because the tariff wasn't what you wanted. You wanted the capitulation in the other area. Either you wanted tariffs removed on American goods and services, or you wanted that other country to actually start engaging in whatever activity it was that they weren't currently doing, or to stop engaging in activity that they were currently doing. And once they did it, you froze the tariff or you removed it altogether. Trump understands that international trade is a good thing on the whole. He also understands that the United States has been victims of very, very bad trade deals for a variety of reasons. Some of them having to do with monetary policy. Others, I think, just negotiated horribly. Others, I think, just pure corruption, if we're being honest. So Trump also gets that. Now, this is the part where I think it's a little bit different, right? So I would say, see, Trump understands tariffs aren't the key to prosperity. I think Trump believes that is generally true, but then he makes exceptions for certain industries which he believes are key to the United States. This goes into kind of the argument that we were talking about before of, I don't want to be overly reliant on a hostile nation for the provision of certain goods and services, which I consider to be essential to the American economy. If we are not currently producing those goods and services, we're going to set up protective tariffs in order to allow domestic industry to be able to rise up and to be able to meet the provision of those goods and services. So that's the distinction I think Trump makes. I don't think he believes tariffs are good in general. I think he thinks tariffs are a good negotiating tool. That's the chemotherapy. And then the part where I have a little bit more of a problem with Trump's strategy is I think Trump believes that in certain cases or certain industries, tariffs are good in order to be able to provide or to be able to create greater domestic capacity of a particular good or service.
Yeah, it's the old Hamilton approach.